Hey everyone, welcome back to the It's a Mind Game podcast. My name is Jade, and today I'm welcoming back one of my favorite guests of all time, Jacqueline Byrne, who you might know on Instagram as Wings and Quill. And today we're going to be talking about a juicy topic, so juicy. But before we dive in, welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Jade. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm always delighted to be here.
Oh, it's my favorite time when we have our sessions booked in between yourself and Claudia. It brings my heart so much joy to know the conversations that we're going to be having. And I guess we were talking about things leading up to this podcast, and what an important topic that we have installed. And I feel like the listeners are going to be like, well, what is it? What is it? What is it? And that's our relationship with exercise. And what is the difference between compulsive exercise and recovered exercise? Because it's really difficult to tell the difference between, I don't know, I'm doing too much, I'm not doing enough, but I love it, but I need to take a rest, but I can't not take a day, but I'm not coping unless I do train. There's so many thoughts and processes that go into our motivation behind our reason to train, regardless of whether it's a leisurely focus or it's coming from an athletic performance side of things. So I guess I would love to know, because you're hosting a workshop on this topic soon, what is it that inspired you to bring this to the forefront and open up the conversation?
So many people that have experienced struggles with disordered eating also experience struggles with finding a helpful way to engage in movement and exercise, and similarly might have had periods of obsessionality with exercise and essentially disordered relationships with exercise as well. But I feel like food gets so much more of the airtime when we talk about these topics, and movement gets thrown in there, but we might not necessarily be given the scaffolding to understand what does that look like, what does that mean, and how do I find my way through the experience. How do I find my way to the experience I want to have with exercise and movement when maybe the history has been really disordered? Similarly to food, we can't, it's not always obvious where to go and what that will look like. So I really wanted to offer more detail in my thoughts on what that trajectory can look like and things to be aware of and explore, because it ultimately supports a full recovery being possible.
Absolutely. Now, I guess a good place to start is, could you define for us what compulsive is in relation to exercise? Because there's so many different modalities, intensities, whether you're doing it as a professional or for fun, there's so many variables. So I guess when you're working with your clients or your patients, what kind of things do you hit the little tick boxes as to, this is definitely something that's coming from a compulsion rather than fun, enjoyable, leisurely, all the positive sort of elements?
It's such an important question. So compulsion is a physiological response to an idea or a cognition that we don't feel able to override. So if I had a compulsion, even just to check my phone, see if anyone's messaged me, I either can't not do that, or if I'm overriding it, I feel very distracted and my energy is going towards that rather than being able to stay focused on the conversation. So that's different to enjoying something or being interested in something, or even having a thought like you should be doing this, because it's more of a full bodily response as well as an active mental cognition state where we don't feel able to make our way through those ideas or make sense of it in another way. As a profile of what would be alarming from a clinical perspective for someone presenting with perhaps compulsive exercising, and just as a little side note, sometimes it gets called exercise addiction. Strictly speaking, we don't see it as addiction in clinical terms, but it very much fits that more generic use of that word as something that is very compulsive and does get, we do get pulled into without feeling like we have much autonomy over. So if we understand that idea of what compulsion is, it helps us see how that might play out in someone's life. So for example, if they felt compelled to exercise, pardon me, even though they were injured, or it was unsuitable or even unsafe weather to exercise in, or they were exercising beyond even what was constructive to an end goal. Say if they were a professional, they were part of a team, but they were doing additional training to even what had been recommended or perhaps disencouraged, they still felt compelled to engage in that exercise. One thing that's really important to me in that criteria as well is whether it's aligning to that person's values. So something that's often very telling is if that person does want to connect with their partner, perhaps at the end of the day, or they do want to spend time with family, or they do want to connect with their friends, and that's in their value system and their desires, but that opportunity is interrupted because of the compulsion to exercise. So they find themselves going out and doing exercise rather than spending time with loved ones or otherwise engaging in things that they value. Maybe it's study, maybe it's another interest that they might have, but they aren't able to facilitate that because of the call to exercise.
Thank you. That was a wonderful explanation of it. And so many things popped into my mind. I guess the first thing would be the idea that you're unable to set boundaries with your exercise behavior. And I guess that comes from if you're doing it as a professional or whether you're not. And you drove it back into you're doing more than the plan. Because I guess one thing where the fitness industry has evolved in the last 10 years, and I say this as someone who did all the wrong things and is now working very hard to do the right things, is there wasn't a wealth of knowledge around making sure you allow for rest, making sure you allow for recovery. It was more of the mentality, the more you do, the better you get. Keep pushing, go hard, go, go, go. And no wonder we found ourselves in the situation that we're in because we had this mantra of don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. And it become our behavior, like it become a part of us, that mantra of keep going. And even when you feel like you can't keep going. And for a lot of us, we didn't witness the fact that the reason we can keep pushing is because our adrenaline and cortisol is so high and our addiction to the dopamine hit that it's not actually our body thriving, it's our body surviving. And looking at where we've come now in regards to training protocols, whether you are someone who's just trying to be the strongest they can be or the fastest they can be, or if you're a professional playing football or a professional playing tennis, soccer, you're a marathon runner, there's actually so much focus now on not only complete recovery, but active recovery as well. And it's all very structured to the degree where a lot of coaches and trainers now, they're not applauding their athletes for doing extra. It's like, no, if you want to be coached by me, this is what we do because this is what works. But if you're stuck in that compulsive you're still in that loop of more is good, have to do more, can't feel good unless I'm doing more than, it doesn't even need to be more than a teammate. It literally can just be more than last week.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on cortisol and dopamine as well, because there is very strong research to suggest the helpfulness of a degree of exercise in mental health, and I'd like to come back to that. But a lot of people experimentally say that they've struggled with anxiety and they find exercise and they feel like it's really helping because they exercise and they feel better. But what is actually happening is the person is just depleting themselves, they're exhausting themselves. So when we're in depletion, we don't have the energy to have anxiety. So they're creating that depleted state as a soothing tactic. So it hasn't actually absolved the anxiety, but even more concerningly is that if we already are experiencing a lot of anxiety, we are in the flight or flight response. We're in a sympathetic nervous system response. And that means that our body is experiencing the world as a place of threat, or we're interpreting something as that threatful. If we then say running or doing intensive cardio, our ancestral knowledge at a cellular level is telling us that we are most likely unsafe in a scenario where we're trying to outrun something that fast, or we're running for that long beyond what our body would joyfully do. So it's further affirming that the world perhaps is a dangerous place, and it's releasing cortisol and adrenaline to facilitate that additional movement to what would be joyful. It's like, I use the word joyful, if you remember when you're a kid ever going into like a warehouse space or like seeing an open field and just feeling like, oh, I just want to run, and like putting out your arms and being an aeroplane or something, and there's no thought of, oh, this will burn this much, or this will benefit my physique in this way. It's just open space. I want to move. This is incredible. Or the balmy summer evening or something that gives you that spurt like a rabbit leaping for joy at dusk.
Yeah, it's like free will.
Exactly. And it's for nights, like you have that joyful burst and then you feel like rest. And you'll watch children do this very much, like they can be a helpful reference with intuitive eating. They're a helpful reference with intuitive movement. They very much want to do their movement. Human bodies want to move and they enjoy moving, but they'll close out that end when the facilitation of that stops being helpful. So to keep pushing through to complete that workout or the run, whatever we had planned, we start to tap into stores that actually further disturb longer term mental health patterns, perhaps because what we then do once we've exhausted that level of cortisol is produce more to restore the level that was exhausted, because biologically we assume this state we're in is probably remaining threatening.
Yeah. And have you ever explored with, I guess, any of the people that you've worked with, that sometimes this heightened cortisol response, I guess I'm saying this more because it's something I experienced firsthand as well, is that because you can stimulate the cortisol, the adrenaline, the dopamine so frequently that you almost become addicted to that level all the time. So suddenly, again, you're feeling like you're thriving because you're so alert and you're so curious and you're so excited to train and everything's like go, 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 that you embody that feeling as health, because I'm firing. And I remember like literally feeling like my eyes were always just so alert and I could hear everything. I remember interpreting as, I just feel so good, right? Because as you said, going back thousands of years, it's like, well, if we're stressed, we either need to be hunting food really quickly or running away from something that's about to attack us. So therefore, you need to be alert. You need your eyes open. You need to be able to hear. You need to have this, uncapped amount of energy. And I feel as well that's where it can be quite tricky to explain to those that are caught up in this compulsiveness or the addiction of it, because you're trying to have the open conversation with them, literally to bring to awareness that this heightened health feeling may not be what our perception of it is. And because it's gradually built up to this peak that you're now maintaining, you've almost taught yourself that this is your new base and this is where you need to be, when the reality is this is that survival space 24/7. And just because you're feeling it all the time doesn't mean your body's literally primed to be going all of the time. And it's, I guess, when you are caught up in it, it's quite difficult to let that information in, because there's so much of you that's motivated to, well, I can train so much because look how good I feel. Look at me go. I never run out. I'm like an energizer battery. And then you've got someone trying to say, almost to a degree, this is a fake response because it's not real energy, it's survival energy. And it can be difficult to, I'm going to say, convey it in a way that the person who's caught up is open to receiving the information, because we kind of know the outcome we want, which is to do exercise as much as we can.
You explain that so beautifully, Jade. You're so right that it's like the romance, similar to an eating disorder, with the ideal that we've been so indoctrinated with what health looks like, which in truth, health doesn't have an aesthetic. It doesn't look any particular way in a different body at a different time. It's totally incomparable to another. But we've been taught it looks like someone in exercise gear. It looks like someone with shiny hair, whatever the features would be that we've been sold, largely subconsciously over and over again, so that we feel comforted the more that we feel aligned to that. And we assume that the seeming benefits, the feedback that we're getting is part of that story that we've been sold. And I wonder if you've seen in your professional experience as well that when people are in that state, it's very likely to lead to burnout. Like, it is unsustainable for the reasons you've mentioned. And then that's heartbreaking, because it feels like a utopia. It feels like you've tapped into this incredible source of energy and this lifestyle, and almost like a belief system, a religion around that of sorts. And then it doesn't continue to work, or people run into different life phases, like maybe wanting to have a baby, and it doesn't continue to work.
Yeah, and once you sort of have that, because everyone kind of, I'm going to say wakes up to it, and I don't mean that in that unsympathetic way, but I feel like it's an awakening when you're finally open to embracing the information and going, hold on, maybe the reason I am starting to find it so difficult to get out of bed, or I'm so moody or grumpy, or, my period's gone missing, or, the copious amounts of reasons that start to open your eyes up to, well, everything else in life is okay. So maybe it is the exercise. Maybe there is something that I need to reassess. But that shift, it can create almost hostility, because you think about how high you get on life as a result of these behaviors. And that's where I know you said clinically it doesn't fall in the addiction model, but when I think about experiences myself and others, there is so many things you can link to an addictive drug or alcohol or gambling, because we're searching for that high every single time. And that as soon as you realize this high that you're chasing or trying to keep isn't making you well, suddenly you feel angry, because it's like, but I've been tricked. I got so used to loving this, and now you're telling me I've got to take it away. And there's like the stages of grieving, I feel, once you start to awaken to this information and start to witness, hang on, and maybe this is the exercise that's turning my life around. It once was for the good, now it's for the bad. And I just feel sometimes part of that journey to actually taking a step back is that phase of, like, I hate exercise because of this now. I'm still not ready to stop yet, but I'm going to the gym and I'm crying while I'm on the treadmill because I can't not do it. But I hate the fact that I have to, or that I know that it's going to do X, Y, Z to me. And I've just witnessed, firsthand and with clients as well, is that there's that stage where there's just so much anger, because I was told that this was so good for me, and I've been living this quote unquote happy, healthy lifestyle, and now it's ruining me. Who do I trust? Well, what do I do? How, my world's been flipped upside down. Do you sometimes witness that with the people that you work with? Is it that suddenly they're open to this information, but the bitterness, the anger, the resentment, the hurt, because we've taken pride in looking after ourselves, so much so that we have taken it too far and it's working against us?
Yes, completely. And the disillusionment, you use the word hostile, like it's very, very much a feeling of, yeah, I've been duped, I've been tricked, and something I thought was really the right thing to invest my time and energy into flipped on me and betrayed me, and I was misinformed, and all those feelings. It's so similar dynamically to addiction in the ways that you mentioned. And maybe if it was something like a substance that came into a person's life, there's an awareness of what it is and what the contract is almost, in engaging with it. But when it's exercise, or even like eating healthy in inverted commas, there's almost more of an innocence at play, if that's the right word, or like you really so genuinely could have thought that was the end game, like that's what you've been working towards for a really long time. And in so many different people can be affected by this. One like prototype that comes to mind is someone that's also maybe for a long time wanted to be the fit person or the healthy person. Maybe that was not available to them earlier, and they feel like they finally conquer it. And that can feel especially cruel. Like they going to compulsive exercise, maybe that's coming along with orthorexic components or health obsessive components that you said so well. They're trying to do so much of the right thing that it's counterproductive, and it's turning back on them, to then find out that that also isn't the answer, that also isn't going to work. It can be really deflating and quite unmotivating, and to put all that energy again into another philosophy is a big ask.
The word cruel you used, I feel it covers it very well, because it feels like quite a cruel exchange of life. And I find it interesting too how you said, sometimes we're just chasing that fit and healthy lifestyle, and because I guess a lot of us jump from leisurely training and slowly build up to this addiction compulsion, where it's dominating a big part of our life, is that when we're perceiving what's next, it feels like you can't have either. So therefore there's nothing, because you don't want to be the person you were. You don't want to be the person you are, but the awareness isn't there to, well, what is the balanced version of me? Because you know what, you don't have to go back to the person you were who maybe wasn't exercising or didn't take any notice of the food they were consuming, right? Because you know what, there is that healthy plane where you were eating and exercising well and healthily. It's just where it went off track that becomes the issue. But when you're sort of awakening yourself to this, sometimes it's almost like you're tunnel visioning outcomes, which is either, well, I stay as I am, which I'm miserable, or I be who I was and I was miserable. So I'm better off staying addicted to exercise, and I'll burn myself out, and because I don't want to be who I was. But at the same time, even though you're having that conversation with, I'll just keep going because I don't want to go back, you can't keep going, which is why you're having the awakening, because it's like, there has to be more to life than this. And I'm not just saying this on whether you're trying to get your period back. It literally could be, as you said earlier when describing compulsion, is you're sitting there starting to realize, oh my goodness, I'm at the gym when I should be at home with my husband or my child or my best friend or my mum and dad, and you're starting to recognize that maybe you're at the gym at all these really odd hours and no one's around. Is there a reason for that? Like, should I be sleeping? Should I be with my loved ones? Should I be doing something fun like going to the football? And all those things start to come into your truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a really cruel situation, and that uncomfortability in the limbo is so important to tolerate with any threshold that you have, to be able to tolerate it after everything someone that's gone through these things has been through. It's very much like when we talk about eating, that there's no going back to the way that it was, even if that was possible, because that self, even though maybe you think seemingly you had balanced eating as such and then developed an eating disorder, that self prior to the eating disorder was the self that developed an eating disorder, but the seed was already planted. There was already something in that way of being that wasn't sustainable. So the self that was before was the self that was then vulnerable in some way to obsessive exercise. And it won't be either of those iterations of you that is where this is going, but there's a way of, and it might be inspiring to talk a bit about what that can look like and does look like for so many people that even after knowing disordered exercise can find their way back to not engaging with it in that way. And that, when you were saying about training and people that are professional athletes and maybe work in sports and fitness industries, there may be an additional degree of training or fitness capacity that's required for them to execute their job responsibilities, essentially. But they would still be able to put it down at the end of that time. So if that's an extra amount of time or an extra intensity, there isn't a sense of ongoing from that there is with compulsive exercise. And compulsive exercise does have a higher frequency of showing up in sports and professional athletics, absolutely. But a discerning point between those two experiences is how you do when the day is done, and also mentally, like, are you still thinking about it? Are you over planning it, or can you let it be and trust your training and trust the support around you to go forward? And it's almost, the ratio, people ask things like, well, how much exercise is too much then? Or what should I be doing? Are there types of exercise I should just avoid? There are types of exercise that are associated with more compulsivity because of the way they affect us neurologically. The number one on that list is running, and the others are around higher cardio activities. But I feel that the most important criteria in this is trusting your own reading on your engagement with that activity, because you can turn anything into compulsive exercise. And I've certainly seen people do that. You can take activities that are more marketed and maybe very much intended to be relaxation activities or about other components of fitness that aren't associated as much with aesthetic feedback, and very much become addicted to that. Or even from that orthorexia perspective, it might not even be about the aesthetic, but about the sort of health obsessiveness that gets in the way of those things. It becomes, to go through most compulsive exercise, there's a requirement of dissociation from your body. So they're coming back into your body is essential to be able to trust in yourself, that you know where that end line is for you. Because it will be, our bodies want to move seasonally in different ways. They want to, just like in some days, if we were eating intuitively, we would eat a lot of food, and other days, intuitively, that might not be required. Exercise would look similar. It would be one of the features of what would probably look like intuitive movement is that there is a lot of variety, and there is a lot of transition to, oh, now it's cold now, I don't want to do that exercise outside. I feel like moving my body now in this way that's softer and calmer, and I feel warmer and safer. Or now the weather's changed, I feel like doing this, or a group of my friends are doing that, I want to join in with that. So that it's a holistic assessment, even if we don't particularly think through it as such, but it's a holistic assessment as to what the benefit is going to be, and what the pull is into those different ways of moving your body, and that other parts of life would interrupt that all the time. That would be a really good sign that your friend has a birthday that you want to go to, and so you don't engage in the regular class that you used to do on that night, or there is something else calling you, or just also times where you don't particularly feel like it because you know that you're tired, and that can be a priority, is what intuitive movement would ultimately look like.
Yeah, and I feel like that idea of being able to be spontaneous is the key with how you described all of that. It's like the spontaneity of, well, how do I feel on the day? What other exciting things are happening? What do I have access to environmentally? And that ability to make a decision on the spot versus, let's say, the night before being like, this must be executed, or the week before, or the month before. And I'd love to sort of break it down, that compulsive side of things, just because as you were speaking, I'm like, I feel the listeners might be thinking these things, which is, some might be sitting here listening going, yeah, but the women you're talking about, or the men you're talking about, are training 2 times a day for a couple of hours. I only do exercise 3 days a week for 1 hour, right? Exercise guidelines say you should do 30 minutes 3 times a week. I'm just doing what the guidelines tell me, so that can't be me. Can someone still be showing exercise compulsion or addiction despite doing what quote unquote society tells us, or health guidelines tell us, is reasonable, moderate, healthy?
Yes, in capital letters, absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked that question, Jade. That's so important, because it comes back to the point that it might fit within recommended guidelines. And I'm just thinking about how there's such a parallel to disordered eating as well, because people can very much be eating something that on paper might not raise alarm, but the way that they're engaging with that food is the problematic component. How much it means to them, how much they think about it, how much they plan it, what it feels like when it doesn't go to plan, and all of that is equally true with exercise. So if you have those sessions and if they were interrupted, it would be a stressful occurrence, or you would feel like you needed to compensate then on a different day and reschedule it, or you couldn't concentrate on the activity that you ended up engaging with because you weren't exercising at the time you normally would. Mm-hmm. That's not okay. That's not a healthy place to be at with exercise. But also, is it appropriate for your body at this particular time? Because these guidelines exist with incredible assumptions on averages that a whole other conversation, but may not be particularly scientifically accurate anyway. So if you're using that to decide what's right for your body, it's symptomatic of that disconnection from your body, because it's not coming from how your muscles feel and how much energy you have in that point in time, and environmental factors, and how your relationships are doing, and what feels good and nourishing to you. It's coming from something that maybe a government guideline told you to do, which in your case might be really unhealthy because you don't have the resources to do that. Or from a mental health perspective, it would lessen the opportunity to do an alternate activity or have an alternate opportunity that would serve you much more.
I find it actually pops up a lot, honestly, in all environments that I'm exposed to, but that 10,000 steps a day, because it's somewhat innocent in the fact that it's just walking. We're made to walk. You don't need to pay a gym membership for it. You've got a watch that'll count your steps for you. But I feel there's so much context to that recommendation, and I'm honestly glad it's coming up right now, because I feel like it applies to everybody. Is that, if you're training a couple of hours a day, or even just 1 hour a day, that changes your need to do 10,000 steps. Like, for the most part, that guideline was created for people that for the most part are incredibly sedentary, and 10,000 steps means that they get up and they walk for an hour. But we are in a society where, for the most part, especially those that are listening to the podcast right now, they might be walking up and down for their job all day. Perhaps they're already training and then they have an active job, or maybe they've trained and then they have a sedentary job. But the necessity to get the step count in is very different, because that recommendation was based on people that for the most part are sedentary and also well fueled, because that changes everything again, doesn't it? If you've got someone who's undernourished and sedentary, that's not going to be the best application for them either. You might want to go for a nice walk around the block to just clear your head and get some fresh air, and wonderful. But I guess that's a good example of the compulsion. Whereas if you're just going out for a walk to enjoy being outside and getting some fresh air in your lungs, that's lovely. But if you're going outside because you must hit that step target, like, even as I say that, there's such a difference in the language. There's such a difference in my tone of voice. It's like, oh, a nice leisurely walk, hit the 10,000. Like, there's instantly intensity. And, it's so easy for us to think that it's such a good guideline. It's so simple. It's so easy. But depending on what your individual life looks like right now, that can actually be quite damaging health information for you, which is where sometimes those guidelines can be really difficult to work with, because I can absolutely understand the argument of someone going, but it's a guideline. I'm just doing what I should. And it's like, oh, hang on, but let's look at this big picture. Like, what's happening in your world right now? For you as an individual, is this the best option for you? Or is your best choice to, as you said, like, intuitively, what sort of walk feels nice? And that's not going to be dictated by a length, a duration, a step count. It's just, I'm going to turn around when I feel like it's time to turn around. But that is absolutely something you can relearn if you've been stuck in that compulsive behavior. Because I guess we started off a bit gloomy about this. Probably I did that. Sorry, guys. About this idea that it feels so awful when you start to recognize that your exercise is working against you and you feel so stuck. and you can't see where the balance lies or the moderation lies, or this idea of spontaneous exercise. Like, are you kidding, ladies? I have a plan. and I can giggle about it because, like, we've all been there. So, but that's how it feels in the moment. And even the fact that you and I can have a chuckle about it right now, it's not belittling that situation, because at the time it's very confronting and it's awful, but it's more, it feels all consuming. And then once you get out of it, you can look back and go, oh my gosh, I remember thinking I only had one option and I have so many more. And those options still include having a training plan, being in a competitive sport. Like, you can still plan your exercise. It's not a never plan anything ever again, never, like it's not that. It feels like that when we start learning this concept. It's like, what do you mean be spontaneous? But it's the actual execution of becoming intuitive with your exercise is so far from, I guess, how it's initially perceived. I feel like I'm talking in circles now, but do you know what I'm saying? It's such a different reality once you're in it.
Yes, from the outside, it could merely seem like a tweak in some situations, but it's the intention behind it and the way of relating to it. Because what's missing in that former picture of compulsive exercise is a relationship with yourself and trust with yourself. So once that begins to get reestablished, that becomes your compass for making that decision of, like, how do I want to move? When do I want to move? And it might be quite subtle in that you just choose to leave a class 5 minutes earlier because you're a bit tired, or you want to get home in time to be there when your partner gets home, or something that's so almost feels so minor with the extent of what we're talking about, and certainly the extent of what it feels like, but it's actually everything, because it totally pivots your orientation to your relationship with exercise and what that does in terms of mental health, what that saves you from, and what it very likely supports in healthiness for your body is monumentous. And it's so transferable to intuitive eating ideas, because similarly, when we talk about intuitive eating, people think we can't just click your fingers and expect this. Like, what if I feel like X, Y, and Z meal in the middle of the day? Like, I know I ate that when I was in Paris. I can't have that shipped over. Like, what does that look like? Where's the realistic aspect of it? And there might have to be a period where it's very intuitively led. And people that experience exercise compulsion often find there is a place for a period of lower exercise or no exercise, almost to come back to baseline, like to be able to reintroduce. But then it might end up, for practical reasons, looking like some scheduled in times to move your body, and you feel like doing yoga, you usually have to go to a class at a set time. You can't. So I felt intuitively like coming in 15 minutes late, and there's a functionality to that. Just like with eating, that we usually need to schedule in some meals or have lunch at lunchtime if we're at work, and it can't be that intuition is the one and only thing that discerns those experiences. But it feels like it has that gravity to it when there's been such a weighting in the ratio of structure and plan, and really it being quite obsolete, the component of relationship with yourself or trusting yourself.
And I feel like it's something that you actually need to practice. So, as you said, to completely remove exercise, everyone has their different path, but I must admit, I am a fan of taking a month off for most, and purely because it's a very powerful way to recognize you have choice over your actions, because sometimes we get so overridden by our behavior loops and our patterns that suddenly it's the habit of training or the habit of getting up and doing XYZ things that is overriding our lives, and we don't witness it because it's so automatic for us that it becomes what we do. So that pause just for a month, I find it's almost like a circuit breaker to be like, oh no, wait, I can actually choose when to exercise. And it just so happens that that decision doesn't have to be the same time every day or the same location each Monday, Tuesday, or whatever it might be, because once we're sort of in that position where we do need to reassess what we're doing, everything is very strict. And we feel like the only way to succeed with our training is to be that strict with it. So I guess there's multiple elements to it, where one, if you can learn that, you can actually survive without training, like, and it's a tough pill to swallow, but it's such a good one, because suddenly you do get your power back, because it's not the exercise leading you, it's actually you leading the exercise. And then when you slowly reintroduce it again, for most of those listening that are into their exercise, by now you would know about deload weeks, you would know about strategic rest and how programming works. So even if you were to take 4 weeks off, it seems like a lifetime, but the benefit your body would get. And I'm saying you can still do some yoga and walking and all that sort of thing, like fun exercise. As you said, if you happen to go to the zoo and there's a big patch of grass and you just want to chase after birds, it's like, yes, we're not saying go sit on the couch and do not move, because every movement is sabotaging your shutdown reboot. Like it's not that. It's like, no, if you want to go to bounce and jump on trampolines with your best friend for an hour, go for it. But invite that in. Fun movement, like your heart rate getting up isn't the problem. It's the behavior loops of it that's become the problem. And I also found that reintroducing the exercise gradually then gives us the opportunity to go, oh, wow, I actually train really well if I have a rest day every second day, or perhaps if I train in the afternoon one day and in the morning the next, and then the next afternoon, you can actually increase your rest periods, even though you're still training each day, just by getting creative with time slots. And suddenly it becomes fun to play around with these behaviors, because it's like, oh, it turns out that if I actually put living life first and training second, my training can be just as good. Because I feel sometimes that gets lost in translation. If we start to say to someone, let's get your control back of your free will, literally, they feel like we're trying to say you can't be a good athletic performer again. It kind of, because it's like attacking their character or their skill. And it's again, once you're sort of in it, you can start to see that if you love training and you want to perform well and you want to be super strong and you want to be super fit, like that's so good. But let's actually allow space for it, because at the moment you're run down and you're probably not performing that well, or to the outer community, especially if you're not doing a competitive sport, everyone else might be commenting, you're so fit, you're so strong, so you're above average, right? But you're not lifting any heavier, and you're not getting faster. So secretly, whatever's happening isn't working for you. So the glorious thing about taking this step back to reassess is suddenly you also give yourself the opportunity to really boost, like, how good can you be if you're letting life in? And that's the coolest part. We're not saying give up training. We're actually saying invite in some fun, invite in joy, invite in friends and family and relationships and career goals, study goals. Like, let's create space for these other things that make up a fun, spontaneous life. And believe it or not, but simultaneously, you can create this capacity to be better than you've ever been before, not just in training, but in your whole world. How exciting is that?
Awesome, Jade. It's so true. It's so true. And the knowing that human bodies were meant to move, and that's part of celebrating life, and it is part of good mental health. But I wanted to say, as a footnote to that as well, the research on movement for mental health is very minimal, and it's largely functional and could be coincidental with people being engaged in life having better mental health because they're walking to their friend's house and they're walking around at the shops, or they're going to a park. And so there's movement in those things to facilitate engaging with life. So it's not, movement avoidance is not the goal. It's another side of the same coin of disordered exercising, is the absence of it altogether, and being afraid of it, maybe because of past experience, or maybe because of an idea someone has about themselves of not being able to move, or being that being an association that is fearful for them. but that isn't life affirming. That isn't lifting up of our full potential and all that we can do while we're here. So it's really an exciting thing to talk about after everything we've covered today, because it's incredibly important. I think that listeners have that message highlighted from the conversation, that this is about fullness in every domain, and having that very accessible, but just more aligned to what you really are.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, anyone who's been listening to the podcast, like, there is actually a consistency with those who've taken a step back from training and reintroduced it, is that they love it just as much as they did, if not more, because they mentally and physically have the capacity to enjoy it more, because they've had their social stimulus, they've had their rest, they've had, all the other external joys that we get from our day-to-day life. And then suddenly, rather than exercise being their world, it's more like the cherry on top. It's like, so it's still powerful, it's still fun, it's still exciting, it's still something they can't wait to do, but it's not dictating how fast the world spins. It's purely just kind of gliding around with it, which is where all the fun is. And I'm glad we've sort of closed things up and fixed here, because for those of you listening that might be witnessing that maybe there is a compulsion around the exercise, or it is quite addictive, that the recovery process, it may feel difficult and you feel stuck and you feel like there's only two exits, where you are now or where you were. But the reality is there's such potential in everything that you're about to explore, and not for a second is any of it closed captioned. Like, you can create a brand new reality that honestly you probably can't even imagine in this moment. But if you just start trying to explore what it could look like, just start there, like visualizing just what could it look like if I had the choice to train at a different time, take a day off, go on a holiday, see some friends, like just entertain the thought. Like, that's the start. Just create space for it, because you will start to realize there's something really exciting about it. You just need to give it some space.
I have this idea that I feel is really important in this conversation of the transformative component of experiencing this transition is to also consider, when you're moving, what part of you're exercising. Like, is it the mentality that you're moving from that's motivating you is getting bigger? So it's very much that you're animating a part of your story of who you are every time you move, every time you use a fuel source. So if it's coming from that force, from that sense of, I have to execute this that I planned last night, it has to look this way, that part of you is going to grow. And likewise, moving from joy, moving from connectedness, moving from your values will make those things bigger. And that can be its own little filter for assessing how helpful engaging with exercise is in that moment for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. I feel like I want to keep talking. And you know what? I feel like there needs to be a part 2 to this, which is what life looks like with fun, spontaneous, recovered exercise behaviors, because there's so much in this conversation, isn't there? So I'd love to have a second half, which is what that means. How do we find it? And maybe we could even talk about what protocols different people use to kind of keep their new spontaneous sort of style of training versus almost getting too confident that you accidentally revert back, because that happens too. And it's not with ill will or bad intention. It's just you almost get so confident with this ability that, no, I just train when I want to and it's so fun, that suddenly you go, oh my goodness, I haven't taken a day off. But it wasn't bad. It's just you almost felt that good that you kind of did a little bit too much. But again, it's such a playful thing, and it's nice to feel that rather than sort of, yeah. But before we finish up, could you please share what is up and coming, the workshop you're going to be running? Because I'm so excited about it.
I'm so excited too. We will be covering a lot of the ideas that we touched on today, and really looking at how participants can make that meaningful for them and their personal experience with movement, exercise, where they're currently at, to understand where their risk areas may be, may continue to be, or as such a good point that you made, like the sneaky reintroduction of it into our lives unwittingly, what to look out for and how to understand that if it is creeping in, and then how to build confidence in the self that always has known how to move, just like children know how to move. How do we reconnect to that, and how do we make that stronger for ourselves and trust it?
Wonderful. Now, I'm going to leave the details for that in the show notes, as well as your Instagram handles and emails, in case anybody wants to participate, because it sounds amazing. As always, Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us today, and I can't wait for our next conversation.